While headlines fixate on Canada's F-35 seconds, Ottawa quietly made an Arctic-defining move with Sweden, one that challenges alliance dependence and rewrites sovereignty. While global headlines remain fixated on Canada's multi-billion-dollar commitment to the F-35, something far quieter and far more consequential has been unfolding beneath the surface. Ottawa did not pause. It did not announce a reversal. Instead, it moved laterally, signing a parallel agreement with Sweden for 88 Gripen fighter jets. Not as a contingency, not as leverage, as a signal. This was not a procurement adjustment. It was a strategic recalibration, and it marks one of the most underreported shifts in Western defense policy in decades. To understand why this matters, you have to strip away the noise surrounding fifth-generation hype and look at how states actually preserve power. Fighter aircraft are not just weapons, they are political systems. They define who controls software, who authorizes upgrades, who can share data, and who ultimately decides when and how force is used. For most of the Cold War and the decades that followed, Canada accepted its place within a US-dominated defense architecture, American aircraft, American supply chains, American permission structures. That arrangement was efficient, predictable, and deeply asymmetric. But the international environment has changed. The Arctic is no longer a frozen buffer. It is an emerging frontier of shipping routes, undersea infrastructure, and strategic competition. Russia has militarized its northern coastline. China now declares itself a near-Arctic power. Surveillance flights, submarine patrols, and airspace probes are increasing in frequency. For Canada, this is not theoretical geopolitics. It is geography. The Gripen deal must be understood through that lens. Canada is not choosing between jets, it is choosing between operational philosophies. The F-35 is optimized for coalition warfare launched from secure, infrastructure-heavy bases. The Gripen was built for dispersed operations, short runways, limited crews, and autonomous decision-making. These are not abstract design differences, they are reflections of national strategy. What makes this shift especially significant is timing. Ottawa moved while negotiations with Washington over the F-35 were still ongoing. That alone suggests dissatisfaction. But dissatisfaction with what? Publicly, the conversation centers on cost overruns and readiness rates. Privately, the issue runs deeper. Control. When a nation cannot modify its own aircraft software without external approval, sovereignty becomes conditional. When mission profiles require third-party authorization, independence becomes symbolic. This is where Sweden enters the picture. Stockholm is not offering Canada a platform alone. It is offering a model: technology transfer, local assembly, domestic maintenance, national control over weapons integration. In effect, Sweden is proposing something the US defense industry rarely does: a partnership rather than a dependency. For Canada, whose aerospace industry was dismantled in the mid-20th century, that offer carries historical weight. There is also a psychological dimension at play. The cancellation of the Avro Aero in 1959 remains a scar in Canada's strategic memory. It represents a moment when ambition was traded for alignment, and industrial capacity was sacrificed for alliance cohesion. Thousands of engineers left, capability evaporated. The country became a buyer rather than a builder. The Gripen Agreement reopens that chapter, not as nostalgia, but as correction. This is why the number 88 matters. Analysts calculate that this fleet size aligns with sustained Arctic coverage, not symbolic presence. From Yukon to Baffin Island, from Alaska to Greenland, it represents persistence, endurance, ownership of airspace. Combined with dispersed basing concepts and rapid turnaround cycles, it suggests a doctrine built around denial rather than dominance. What we are witnessing is not a rejection of NATO, nor a rupture with Washington. It is a recalibration of terms. Canada is asserting that alliance participation does not require technological subordination. That interoperability does not have to mean dependency. And that sovereignty is no longer just about borders, but about code, supply chains, and decision rights. This is the quiet turn that changes everything. Not because it breaks alliances, but because it forces them to evolve. To grasp the full implications of Canada's Gripen decision, we need to move past political rhetoric and examine the mechanics of modern air power. Fighter aircraft today are not defined solely by speed, stealth, or payload. They are defined by sustainment models, software architecture, logistics chains, and mission availability rates. This is where the divergence between the F-35 and the Gripen becomes operationally decisive. The F-35 was designed as a networked multinational system. Its strength lies in sensor fusion, stealth penetration, and integration into U.S.-led command structures. But that integration comes at a cost. Maintenance requires specialized facilities, software updates are centrally controlled, mission data files are managed through American systems. Readiness rates across multiple operators have struggled to exceed 50% in peacetime conditions. For expeditionary warfare, that may be acceptable. For territorial defense across remote, infrastructure-scarce regions, it becomes a liability. The Gripen was designed under entirely different assumptions. Sweden built it expecting its main bases to be destroyed early in a conflict. As a result, the aircraft can operate from 800-meter runways, including reinforced highways. Turnaround times are measured in minutes, not hours. A small ground crew can refuel, rearm, and relaunch the aircraft without heavy equipment. This is not an engineering curiosity. It is a doctrine of survivability. Canada's Arctic environment mirrors many of these constraints. Extreme cold, sparse infrastructure, vast distances, short windows for interception. In such conditions, sortie generation matters more than stealth. Availability matters more than theoretical performance envelopes. The Gripen's ability to maintain high mission readiness with limited logistical footprints aligns directly with Canada's operational reality. Then there is the software question. Modern fighters are software-defined platforms. Whoever controls the code controls the aircraft. With the F-35, access is restricted. Weapon integration, sensor upgrades, and electronic warfare modifications require approval from the United States. This structure is designed to protect sensitive technology, but it also embeds dependency. For nations seeking autonomy, that dependency becomes strategic friction. Under the Gripen model, Canada would control its own software environment. It could integrate weapons from multiple suppliers. It could adapt avionics to national requirements. It could update systems without external authorization. This is what defense analysts mean by technological sovereignty. Not isolation, but agency. Economics reinforce this distinction. Estimates place the Gripen's operating cost per flight hour at a fraction of the F-35's. Over a 30-year life cycle, those savings translate into more flight hours, more training, and higher readiness. In practical terms, pilots fly more, crews maintain proficiency, aircraft remain available, deterrence becomes credible through presence, not promise. The industrial dimension is equally significant. Saab's proposal includes final assembly and long-term maintenance within Canada. Rolls-Royce has indicated willingness to manufacture engines domestically. This would revive aerospace capabilities lost generations ago. It would create skilled labor pipelines. It would embed defense production into national economic planning. That integration blurs the line between security policy and industrial strategy. Critically, none of this requires abandoning NATO. Interoperability is not binary. The Gripen already operates within alliance frameworks. Data links, shared protocols, and joint exercises remain viable. What changes is leverage. Canada would no longer be structurally dependent on a single supplier or political capital for operational freedom. This shift mirrors trends among other medium powers. Nations are increasingly seeking diversified defense relationships, balancing alliance commitments with domestic control. The Swiss experience with F-35 cost escalation and usage restrictions has reinforced these concerns. When budgets expand and autonomy contracts, strategic calculus shifts. What emerges is a clear pattern. Canada is prioritizing resilience over prestige, availability over abstraction, control over convenience. In doing so, it is redefining what air power means in the 21st century, not as a symbol of alignment, but as a tool of national strategy tailored to geography, economy, and political will. And that recalibration sets the stage for deeper consequences. Every strategic shift creates friction, and Canada's Gripen move is no exception. Beneath the technical arguments and industrial benefits lies a web of geopolitical consequences that extend well beyond procurement. This decision intersects with alliance, politics, Arctic competition, and the often unseen influence of defense industrial networks. At the alliance level, the question is not whether Canada remains committed to NATO, but how NATO interprets autonomy. Interoperability has long been used as both a technical requirement and a political tool. Critics will argue that diverging from US platforms complicates joint operations. Supporters counter that true interoperability is procedural, not proprietary. The tension between those positions reflects a deeper struggle over who defines alliance standards. The United States defense industry plays a central role here. Large programs like the F-35 are not just military assets, they are economic ecosystems. Supply chains span dozens of countries. Political capital is invested alongside financial capital. When a partner reduces participation, it disrupts more than procurement timelines. It challenges influence networks built over decades. Canada's decision signals a willingness to absorb that pressure. It suggests Ottawa is prepared to trade some political comfort for operational control. That trade-off becomes even more significant in the Arctic, where great power competition is intensifying. Russia's Northern Fleet remains its most capable naval formation. New bases, airfields, and missile systems line the Arctic coast. China's interest in polar routes and resource access adds another layer of complexity. In this environment, speed of response matters. The ability to launch aircraft from dispersed locations, sustain high sortie rates, and operate independently under degraded conditions becomes decisive. The Gripen's design philosophy aligns with denial strategies rather than power projection. It is built to complicate adversary planning, not to dominate airspace indefinitely. There is also an intelligence dimension. Control over software and data flows determines who sees what and when. Aircraft generate vast amounts of information: sensor data, electronic signatures, mission logs. When that data is routed through external systems, sovereignty becomes porous. Canada's move suggests an intent to retain tighter control over information sovereignty as well. Economic networks intersect with these strategic choices. Defense contracts shape regional economies. Jobs, research funding, and industrial capacity follow procurement decisions. By anchoring production domestically, Canada reduces exposure to external supply disruptions. It also limits the influence of transnational lobbying that often accompanies major defense programs. The historical resonance of the Avro Arrow amplifies these dynamics. That cancellation was not merely an industrial decision, it was a strategic realignment toward dependence. Reversing that trajectory carries symbolic weight. It reframes Canada not as a passive participant in security arrangements, but as an architect of its own defense posture. None of this occurs in isolation. Nordic countries share similar operational challenges and strategic outlooks. Harsh climates, sparse populations, long borders, a focus on resilience rather than scale. Canada's alignment with this model opens pathways for deeper cooperation beyond aircraft. Joint training, shared logistics, coordinated Arctic surveillance, a networked approach that complements rather than replaces existing alliances. This diversification reduces single-point failure risks. It also complicates adversary calculations. When defense ecosystems are distributed and adaptable, coercion becomes harder, influence dilutes, predictability declines. From an intelligence perspective, that ambiguity is a form of deterrence. Of course, risks remain. Domestic political cycles can erode long-term commitments, budget pressures can slow industrial buildup, external pressure can test resolve. The challenge will be sustaining momentum once the initial shock fades and bureaucratic inertia returns. Yet the underlying logic remains intact. Control over technology equals control over strategy. In a world where alliances are tested and supply chains weaponized, autonomy becomes insurance. Canada's Gripen decision reflects a recognition that modern security is not guaranteed by alignment alone. It must be engineered, maintained, and defended through deliberate choices. This is not a dramatic rupture. It is a calculated pivot, and its consequences will unfold quietly across runways, factories, and command centers long after the headlines move on. As the immediate debate around aircraft types fades, the broader implications of Canada's Gripen decision come into focus. This is not a story that resolves with a contract signature. It is a trajectory that reshapes how power is exercised, shared, and constrained in an increasingly fragmented international system. At the global level, Canada's move contributes to a gradual erosion of rigid bloc dependency. Alliances remain essential, but their internal dynamics are evolving. States are no longer content to outsource critical capabilities entirely, even to trusted partners. The lesson of recent years is clear. Supply chains fracture, political priorities shift, and access can be conditional. Resilience now demands optionality. For NATO, this evolution presents both challenge and opportunity. A more autonomous Canada does not weaken collective defense. It diversifies it. When members bring distinct capabilities and independent decision-making to the table, the alliance becomes less predictable to adversaries. Interoperability must adapt, but adaptation is not decay. It is maturation. In the Arctic, the consequences are tangible. Climate change is accelerating access to northern routes and resources. Surveillance gaps shrink. Competition intensifies. Canada's ability to assert persistent air presence across its northern approaches will shape regional stability, not through confrontation, but through credible monitoring and rapid response. Deterrence here is quiet, constant, and grounded in geography. Economically, the revival of domestic aerospace production re-anchors strategic industry within national borders. This has cascading effects. Research institutions gain relevance. Skilled labor markets deepen. Innovation ecosystems form around long-term defense needs. Security and prosperity converge. This integration makes future reversals politically costly and strategically unlikely. There is also a signaling effect to other medium powers. Canada's decision demonstrates that autonomy is achievable without isolation, that partnership models exist outside traditional hierarchies, that technological sovereignty does not require abandonment of alliances, but renegotiation of terms. For countries navigating similar dilemmas, this sets precedent. The risks are real. Cost estimates can shift. Industrial timelines can slip. External pressure can intensify. But the alternative, continued dependency without leverage, carries its own costs. Strategic choice always involves uncertainty. The question is, which uncertainty a state is willing to manage? Looking ahead, 3 variables will determine the long-term impact. First, execution. Will Canada follow through on technology transfer, workforce development, and operational doctrine? Second, alliance réponse. Will NATO adapt interoperability frameworks to accommodate diversity or resist change? Third, external competition. As Arctic activity increases, will practical capability outweigh theoretical advantage? These questions do not yield immediate answers. They define a strategic horizon rather than a policy outcome. What is clear is that Canada has chosen to act rather than wait, to invest in control rather than convenience, to prioritize readiness over rhetoric. In an era where power is increasingly exercised through systems rather than symbols, that choice matters. Fighter jets are no longer just instruments of combat. They are nodes in networks of technology, industry, and authority. By choosing how those nodes are controlled, Canada is shaping its role in the international system. The significance of the Gripen deal lies not in its shock value, but in its quiet clarity. It reflects a recognition that sovereignty in the modern age is engineered, not declared. That alliances endure when partners are capable, not compliant. And that security is strongest when nations retain the ability to decide for themselves. The world will continue to watch Arctic routes, alliance summits, and defense budgets. But the real shift is already underway, unfolding in maintenance hangars, software labs, and dispersed runways across the North. That is where the future balance of autonomy and cooperation will be tested, not in press releases. And in that space, Canada has made its position unmistakably clear. Canada's Gripen pivot isn't a headline stunt, it's a test of who controls Arctic skies, software keys, and alliance terms. Watch the readiness numbers, the industrial rebuild, and NATO's reaction. If this briefing sharpened your view, like the video, subscribe, and comment. Autonomy or dependence? What wins for the next decade? Comment.